He asked for food but played like a legend. You won't believe this piano master. Under the flickering streetlight, he sat a gaunt figure with a wild mane of hair, fingers dancing over the dusty keys of an old, battered piano. It wasn't the wood or the age that caught attention, it was the song he played. Mesmerizing, haunting, like whispers from another time. The shadows swayed, caught in mesmerizing rhythms, drawing in a crowd of curious onlookers who had tossed aside their worries, captivated by the show. But that wasn't he all. This was no ordinary musician. He was rumored to have been a prodigy once, flinging himself into concert halls, enchanting crowds with every note. Now, he begged for food like a starving stray, his voice choked with desperation, yet his music flowed like liquid gold. Each note was heavy with emotion, primal, raw, a sound that spoke of love and loss, echoing deep within the chest of each listener. One woman wiped a tear from her cheek, and a man whispered, "What is his story?" As the melody twisted through the air, something strange happened. The sky grew darker, clouds swirling above as if the weather itself was responding to the man's playing. A shiver raced through the crowd as they exchanged worried glances. Was it just a coincidence? Or was there something supernatural about this performance? Each chord seemed to pull at the very fabric of reality, hinting at secrets hidden just beyond reach. Then, just as the climax of the song ignited the night, he paused. His fingers hovered above the keys. Silence swallowed the world, only the distant sound of sirens broke the tension. And the crowd held its breath, hung in suspension, waiting. What would he do next? Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. With a sudden jerk, he slammed his hands down, a cacophony of sound erupting into the frigid air. Gasps mixed with murmurs of excitement and fear rippled through the crowd. He was on fire, the passion pouring out now, a man possessed. Then, just as abruptly, he stopped again and turned, locking eyes with a stranger in the back of the crowd. Who was that? Why did it feel like a challenge? The atmosphere crackled with anticipation, and every heart raced. What loose threads bound this enigmatic man to a world most of them had only glimpsed through the curtain of his music? What had he truly lost, and what was he willing to find again? The crowd buzzed, desperate for answers, yet none were forthcoming. The night held its breath, and so did they. The tension was electric, and the eyes of the crowd were molten with intrigue. The mysterious man had halted, locked in a gaze with the stranger, whose face was obscured by shadows. The moment hung, thick with unsaid words, as if a storm were brewing just beneath the surface. Then, the stranger took a step forward. His presence pierced through the crowd, a looming specter against the flickering light. The people instinctively recoiled, whispers simulating the rustle of leaves in the wind. "Who are you?" someone finally called out. The musician released a breathy laugh, tinged with madness. "I'm no one," he declared, voice low and tremulous, "and yet I'm everyone." A ripple of confusion coursed through the audience. They were drawn closer now, entranced as the stranger continued to close in on the piano. A heavy silence accompanied his steps, every soul holding tight to the edge of uncertainty. The musician's fingers resumed their dance, igniting a melody that twisted through despair and hope. His eyes flickered between the keys and the approach of the stranger. There was a history there, one that whirled in the air like smoke. Each note was punctuated by the resolve of forgotten dreams, cries of anguish tangled with threads of longing. The crowd struggled to comprehend, submerged in the drama unfolding before them. The stranger reached the edge of the circle, his face finally illuminated. It was chiseled, marked by scars of time, as if bearing the weight of the world. Eyes sharp as daggers locked onto the musician, igniting a flicker of recognition that set fire across the crowd. "You're playing like you have something to prove," he spoke, voice smooth yet laced with challenge. With a defiant spark, the musician leaned into the grand fervor of the performance. "Maybe I do," he shouted, passion infusing his words as the music escalated into a frenzy. Each chord struck like thunder, resonating through bones and hearts alike. And the clouds above parted, revealing an unnatural red glow that lit up the night sky. Gasps swept through the crowd, turning wild with confusion. For a fleeting moment, the world felt weightless, suspended in that symphony, held captive under the spell he wove. But then came a piercing scream. A woman collapsed, clutching her chest as if the music had pierced through her very soul. Her anguished face twisted in pain, surrounded by frantic figures rushing to her side. "What is happening?" Voices cried out amidst the chaos. The musician faltered, pausing mid-verse, his eyes darting back to the stranger, the embodiment of fate. "What did you do?" he hissed, the melody fading into an eerie hush. The stranger smiled, a haunting grin, shadowed by something darker than mere challenges. "It's not about what I did, but what you unleashed. Your music, it holds power. Can you tame it?" The crowd buzzed with alarm, drawn into the whirlpool of danger and desperation. The musician trembled, uncertainty casting shadows over his features. Would he succumb to the seductive lure of power, or would he try to pull back the darkness creeping in? And as the sirens wailed closer, a heart-wrenching realization dawned: this was only the beginning. Can he fight the shadows that rise against him, or will they overwhelm him once more? The night hung heavy with tension, the crowd's eyes darting between the musician and the stranger. The abrupt scream still echoed in the air, a haunting reminder of the chaos that had erupted. As the woman writhed on the ground, confusion bloomed into panic. People rushed to help her, their voices blending into a cacophony of fear, but the musician remained transfixed, trapped in the spell the stranger had cast. Energy crackled like electricity around them, but there was no escaping the gravity of the moment. He had sung the song of his heart, and it had summoned something unspeakable. Could he control it? "Step away!" a figure shouted, pushing through the throng. It was a police officer, her face pale under the flickering streetlights. The sight of authority momentarily pulled the crowd back from the ledge of hysteria, but it refocused their fear. "What is happening to her?" the officer demanded as she crouched next to the fallen woman, checking for signs of life. The musician's hands trembled, still hovering above the piano's keys, the melody lingering, taunting him with its latent power. "It's the music!" a man yelled, his voice rising above the rest. "Her heart, it couldn't take it." The word sent a jolt through the audience, whipping tension back into a frenzy. They all turned their apprehensive gazes to the musician. "No," he protested, stepping back from the piano. "This isn't my fault." The stranger laughed, a low, gravelly sound that sent shivers down the spines of everyone within earshot. "Isn't it? Your music came from a deep place, a well of passion that's now surging out of control. But be wary, maestro, once you unleash something this powerful, it cannot be contained." His eyes glinted with a red glow, reflecting the ominous hue of the sky above. Suddenly, the crowd was not just witnessing chaos, they were participants in it. The stranger's aura pulsed, magnetic and dark, pulling them into his orbit. Several people screamed at the sight of shadows creeping along the edges of the street, creeping ever closer. "Run!" someone shouted as the shadows began to take form. Twisted faces and clawed hands reached out from the darkness, hungry and ravenous. Gasps morphed into shrieks as panic swept through the crowd like wildfire. Without thinking, the musician found himself drawn back to the piano. It felt like the last bastion of his former self in this shifting reality. A fleeting thought crossed his mind: could he turn the music into a weapon? With shaking hands, he pressed down on the keys, summoning a new melody. Chaos erupted around him, but he dared to entwine hope within despair. Notes of defiance rang out, drowning the shadows in the brilliance of light. The crowd paused, momentarily transfixed by the song, but the stranger's laughter escalated into maniacal glee. You think you can silence what you started? You'll need more than a simple tune. Just then, with a rush of wind, the swirling darkness intensified. The shadows lashed out, flickering hungrily toward the musician like beating wings. In that split second, with fear clawing at him, he grasped the haunting truth: he was not just playing for himself anymore. He was playing for her. For everyone. Yet as he played, he could feel the shadows tugging at his essence, a price to pay if he continued. Would he be drawn into the darkness, or could his light prevail? And as the last note echoed through the alley, a shattering silence fell. Hearts pounded, lives hung in the balance, and the air crackled with anticipation. In that moment, the musician faced a choice, one that could either lead to salvation or ultimate destruction. What would he do? Would he embrace the power or let it consume him? The line between music and chaos blurred as he prepared to confront the stranger, and the crowd held its breath, waiting for the next chord to determine their fate. The silence lingered, thick with tension and uncertainty. The musician's fingers hovered above the keys, a battlefield of sound and spirit. He could feel the shadows, their cold breath nipping at his resolve, as the crowd's breathing quickened in sync with his racing heart. The dark figure before him was no longer just a stranger, he was a dark conductor pulling at the strings of fate. What will you do? The stranger challenged, stepping closer, the shadows swirling protectively around him like an army ready for battle. Will you fight or surrender? Will you unlock the truth behind your music or let it drown you? With each question, the shadows slithered closer, dark tendrils stretching toward the musician, seeking to entwine themselves around his will. He swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. This wasn't just about a song, it was about life and death. The woman on the ground seemed lifeless, her face pale, a chilling reminder of what was at stake. Summoning the last bits of courage from somewhere deep within, he slammed his fingers onto the keys, provoking a piercing chord that split the silence wide open. It rang out like a clarion call. The sound surged through the alley, shattering the darkness that encroached upon him, illuminating fragments of fear and despair. Is this all you've got? The stranger hissed, his eyes narrowing as the shadows flickered, recoiling from the sudden brightness. You think it ends here? You're only awakening the hunger, my hunger. The musician could sense a shift in the crowd. Their fear was palpable, yet it morphing into a raw determination. Something was stirring deep within them, ignited by the fervent energy of his melody. They looked to him now, eyes wide with a mix of hope and desperation. The musician played faster, intertwining haunting melodies with urgent rhythms, pouring his soul into the music. Each note seemed to resonate with pain, light, and the fear of losing everything. Memories surged in flashes: his childhood dreams, the late-night practices, the butterflies before performances. The stranger stepped forward, unfazed by the growing brightness. You think you're the hero? This is where heroes fall. He raised a hand, beckoning the shadows that raged like a storm behind him. With a primal instinct, the musician shifted his tune, threading frantic beats into his song. It's not me you control, he shouted, letting the chaos fuel his resolve. This is all of us. The crowd began chanting in time with the music, their collective voices rising against the darkness. The shadows writhed, uncertain, caught between the light of hope and the cool grasp of despair. But then, just as the song reached its crescendo, a bone-chilling scream rang out. It pierced through the chaos. One of the shadows had taken form, lunging towards him, a grotesque beast of swirling darkness and hunger. The musician felt a chill shoot down his spine. Embrace it, the stranger yelled, reveling in the chaos. Let the darkness in. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, and without hesitation, the musician dove deeper into his music, pouring everything he had into that final, defiant chord. But in that moment, he realized the inevitable truth: the shadows thrived on every doubt, every fear he harbored. They were the dark reflection of his own insecurities, and they were here to consume him. The chilling beast loomed closer, mouth gaping. Would he succumb to it? Was this music really strong enough to counteract the eternal darkness? As his fingers danced across the keys, a new melody emerged, a desperate plea for unity, a call to rally against the encroaching darkness. The shadows hesitated, momentarily bewildered, but then, in one harrowing instant, the realization struck him hard: the crescendo wasn't just for battle, it was a call for harmony among the living and the dead, a final chance to change the course of fate. And just when it felt like the darkness would engulf him, a voice rose above the rest, a woman's voice, quivering yet powerful, echoing his plea. Together, she shouted. The crowd erupted, their voices mingling with his, turning back to face the shadows as one heartbeat, one soul. What would happen next? Would their unity be enough to vanquish the darkness, or was this the beginning of a far greater abyss? The moment hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope beckoning the uncertain and the brave. The moment stretched like taffy, speeding and slowing in a dizzying swirl. The musician's heart thundered as the collective voice of the crowd surged around him. Together, echoed in layers, creating a tidal wave of hope. Yet, the shadows twisted menacingly, ready to lash out. The beast lunged, a dark silhouette clawing through the air, its hunger palpable. The musician held his breath, feeling the bitter chill of despair claw at his chest. His fingers trembled above the keys, but he pressed on, channeling the energy of the crowd into a single, defiant note. Emboldened, each pounding heartbeat fueled the melody. The song morphed, rising into something larger than him. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was the pulse of the people gathered, the bond of souls reaching for light amidst the overwhelming dark. The melody wove through the alley like a golden thread, stitching hope into the very fabric of the night, but the shadow creature growled, a guttural sound that sliced through the melody, attempting to drown out the harmony. A wave of darkness crashed against the vibrant sound, trying to snuff it out. The musician could feel the weight of it, an oppressive force battling against every note. "Don't stop!" shouted a voice in the crowd. And they didn't. They began to hum along, their voices blending into a powerful symphony that defied the shadows' weight. The fabric of the evening shifted, crumbling from fear into defiance. The stranger's face twisted with rage, his eyes ablaze. "You dare resist?" he spat. He raised his arms again, commanding the darkness to engulf them all. But that unity born from shared fear was a shield. Together, they envisioned a brighter future, and the shadows faltered, their form flickering as if caught between two worlds. Then came a revelation. A flash of what had been hidden roots of the shadowy presence. It was born from fear, from hopelessness, a reflection of the struggles they all faced. The musician felt a pang in his heart, understanding that anger and darkness could easily prevail in this world if they let it take hold. "Fight your fears!" he shouted, digging deeper, letting their collective strength fill his music with greater urgency. The darkness was merely an illusion, a mirage of despair. Unity could dispel it. The crowd shouted louder, their voices weaving into a fabric so intricate that the melody turned into a living thing, swirling around them like a protective cloak. The shadows screamed, twisting in anguish as the musician poured every ounce of his passion into the keys. Just as the shadows broke momentarily, revealing fleeting glimpses of the light beyond, the stranger bellowed, "You think you've won? This is just the beginning." His silhouette thinned, shifting with the rhythms, his voice an echo of deep malice. With one last, deafening crescendo, the musician played on, feeling the light seep into his fingertips. He looked at the beast, a shivering mass of darkness, caught in the brilliance of their collective expression. Would this finally be enough? Would the light of their unity banish this creature and the darkness it offered? And then, as if answering the question, the shadows writhed one last time, their forms beginning to dissipate, scattering like ashes in the breeze. But out from the dissipating darkness, whispers echoed ominously, "We will return." Was this victory merely temporary, a veil hiding deeper treachery? Had they truly triumphed against the darkness, or had they merely opened the door to a greater threat? The crowd fell silent, breath held in collective anticipation. What could possibly await them beyond the edge of this new dawn? The air hung thick with tension as the last echoes of their melody faded, leaving only the whispering wind. The crowd looked at each other, eyes wide and breaths shallow, uncertain of what to make of the silence that followed. The beast was gone, but the threat loomed heavier than before, a darkness that now carried a promise of return. A chill trickled down the musician's spine. He could feel it, that gnawing dread simmering just below the surface of their momentary triumph. There was an unsettling hunger in the air, something that gnawed at their collective hope. What would come next? The rallying of their voices had lit a fire, but how long could it last against the encroaching shadows? The stranger stood amidst the dissipating darkness, his figure now just a shadow woven into the fabric of the alley. Fear flickered through the crowd like a dying ember, and with it, a realization settled: they had fought against a foe that was merely a reflection of their own despair. The darkness had drawn strength from their fears, a cruel puppet master pulling their strings. Was it really a victory? Someone whispered in the back. What if it just returned stronger? Heads turned in confusion and concern. Doubt began to creep in, pulling at the edges of their hope, fraying it like an old sweater. It was as if the light they had created was illuminating a darker truth. The musician's heart raced. He glanced at the faces around him, searching for solace. They were fighters, united by resilience, but fear was a potent poison. No one is alone. He shouted, his voice rising above the murmur. We can't let the darkness twist what we have shared. We must stand together. One by one, hands began to raise. People stepped forward, joining in resolutely. A sudden rush of energy, like the fading embers catching flame again, ignited the crowd once more. Together. They shouted, but from the edges of the alley, emerging from the dark corners, shadows shifted uneasily. A wave of unease gripped the musician. He could see vague shapes forming a group within the shadows, distorted and moving in a dance of malice. They writhed and pulled at each other, feeding off the vulnerability of his audience. That in a split second, the air stilled again, an unnatural quiet draping itself over the alley. The crowd exchanged anxious glances, whispers intertwining, muffled thoughts united in fear. What is happening? The musician clenched his fists, calling upon the remnants of that unbroken spirit. Could they drive it back, or were they too late? A sudden loud crack echoed off the alley walls, like thunder clapping in the silence. The crowd jumped, bodies instinctively inching back, eyes darting toward the source. Above them, the sky, once clear, now twisted, clouds rolled in thick and dark, blocking the moonlight. That a piercing laugh shattered the night. It was the stranger, or at least, remnants of him, his voice a blend of mockery and bitterness. You thought you had won? He howled. Your battle was but a shadow of the true war to come. Shadows feed, and I promise next time, it will be your very hopes they'll consume. His silhouette began to dissolve, but not before sending ripples of fear through the crowd, his laughter echoing ominously among them. The crowd faltered, fear gripping at their hearts once more. They faced a darkness that was not just a creature, but an embodiment of their own worries. Could hope withstand such relentless despair? Stand firm. The musician yelled, his voice cutting through, leaving a raw urgency in the air. We faced the darkness together. And together, we will face what is to come. But as the weight of the world pressed down, doubts returned. Would it be enough to sustain them through another battle? And amidst the chaos, a low, rhythmic pulse began to resonate in the ground, a rhythm not of hope, but a foreboding promise of the darkness inching ever closer. What new tests lay ahead, and how would they answer? The night was far from over, and the shadows were stirring once more. The ground trembled, vibrating with that dreadful pulse, and the crowd stiffened in primal fear. Eyes wide, they instinctively clutched one another tighter, the connection between them a fleeting thread that barely held against the encroaching darkness. The musician felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple, pooling at the nape of his neck, an unsettling reminder that tremors of dread were more than just physical, they anchored themselves in the hearts of the vulnerable. Focus. He urged, desperation creeping into his voice. We have to stay united. But the shadows writhed, their shapes becoming more defined, whispering ugly messages of doubt that slithered into the minds of those gathered, eroding their courage bit by bit. Every heartbeat echoed the pulse from the ground, sickening, hypnotic, relentless. A figure broke away from the mass of darkness and stepped into the meager light that the alley offered. The air stilled once again, an eerie hush enveloping the crowd like a thick fog. It was a woman, her eyes hollow, cheeks sunken as if the very vitality had been drained from her. She wore tattered clothes that hung off her, as if a ghost from a time long forgotten. "Please help us," she wheezed, her voice a brittle whisper that barely cut through the tension. "What do you want?" demanded one man from the back, uncertainty lacing his tone. We don't have anything." "Help isn't what you think," she murmured, tucking a wild strand of hair behind her ear. "It's about what you will give up to fend off the darkness. Your hopes, your dreams, it all feeds the hunger." The words lanced through the crowd like a shard of ice, twisting their insides. The musician felt their fear mix with a sense of hopelessness. Could she really be telling the truth? Was it a price they had to pay? "Enough!" he barked, taking a step toward her. "We aren't giving anything to the darkness. We stand for our freedom." A low rumble echoed from the shadows, laughter mixed with an ominous growl that rattled the bones of everyone present. The shadows thickened, swallowing light in their wake, and in that moment, they became indistinguishable, like a living entity circling them hungry for despair. "Listen to the musician, or lose everything," the woman shot back, her voice rising as fear seeped into her eyes. "But if you give it willingly, the hunger might be satiated for a time." The musician's mind raced. What could hold the darkness at bay? Fear? Despair? Or was there something more, something deeper and more personal? What the woman proposed felt wrong, like handing over bits of their very selves into an oblivion. A loud crash erupted as something struck the ground, separating him from the woman and tightening the blemished grip of shadows around his comrades. The rhythm from below grew faster, pulsing like a war drum, demanding attention, echoing an urgency that felt like a heartbeat. "Gather your strength!" he shouted, his voice a battle cry against the encroaching gloom. "We won't yield to fear." But the shadows surged, lighting up the night with twisted shapes of monstrous laughter. "Soon, you will see just how far you are willing to go to protect that which you claim to love," a voice boomed, deep and resonant, echoing through the alley like thunder. As shadows danced and the woman's face twisted in a macabre glare, the musician felt the ground vibrating more violently now, a vibration that held a threat stronger than any they had faced. Was this the moment they would break? Would fear consume them? The pulse quickened, the echoes of their heartbeat merged with a melody of dread, a tune that promised they would be the ones to decide. And in that moment, the musician felt the weight of the world. He had to act, but how? What song could push back the darkness? As the shadows drew nearer, the future loomed uncertain. What depths would they have to plunge into to protect their hopes? Would sacrifice become their anthem? The night echoed with mystery, and the questions became a haunting lullaby. The ground beneath their feet quaked, and the shadows closed in like a thick fog, suffocating any last remnants of hope. The musician fought the surge of dread, his heart pounding in his chest. He scanned the faces around him, each illuminated by a flickering light, revealing their terror. Eyes darted, breaths quickened, as if the darkness itself could sense their despair and was drawing strength from it. "Stay together," he called out, straining against the tide of encroaching shadows. He sensed their fear mingling with his own, creating a collective panic. "Just what does she mean?" A woman near him cried out, her hands trembling. "What could we possibly give to keep this darkness at bay?" The musician clenched his fists. They had to resist. As doubt crawled through the crowd, he thought back to the woman's words. What were they willing to sacrifice? It was a thought too terrifying to face. Suddenly, a shriek sliced through the air, dragging the crowd's focus to the direction of the sound. A figure staggered from the shadows, a young girl panting as if she had just escaped a nightmare. Her clothes were torn, dirt smeared across her cheeks, but there was a wild light in her eyes, a hint of desperate defiance. "They're coming!" she shouted, voice raw with fear. They want everything." In that moment, something shifted. The musician felt a jolt of courage flicker deep inside him. This wasn't just about him or the crowd, it was about protecting those who could not defend themselves. He took a step forward, challenging the blistering stillness that surrounded them. They want to sow fear. But we can fight, he declared, grounding himself against the trembling earth. If one of us stands, we all stand. Feel the rhythm of your heart, it's stronger than their darkness. As his voice rang out, a murmur erupted from the crowd, mixed with a hesitant hope. Together, they echoed back, voices intertwining, weaving a fragile tapestry of solidarity amidst the chaos. The shadows recoiled momentarily, as if disturbed by the collective will of the people. But the laughter came again, a howling cacophony that surrounded them like a raging storm. You think you stand a chance? The sacrifice will come, whether you want it or not. The musician's heart raced, yet clarity ignited within him. Fight back, he yelled, grabbing a nearby instrument left abandoned by one of the scared souls. He didn't know what he would play, but instinct took over. Under the haunting pressure of the shadows, he struck the keys, channeling every ounce of strength he could muster. The notes hung in the air, raw and powerful. It was unlike anything produced before. Each note was a plea, a lament, and a vow all wrapped into one. As the sounds poured forth, those around him started to feel something shift, their fears dissolving into the melody. Keep it alive, someone urged, inching closer. And more joined, an unexpected formation of voices blending with music, building an anthem against despair. But the shadows weren't finished. They surged with a ferocity, twisting around the crowd, almost alive, whispering taunts and secrets that pierced hearts, trying to unravel their unified force. Foolish mortals, you think you can create light here? The voice within the shadows bellowed, echoing with disdain. She offered you a way. Why deny it? The musician's heart sank at their words, but with everything he had, he shouted, what they want is not what we give. Our hopes belong to us, not to a darkness that feeds on our fear. As he played louder, the tremors of the ground seemed to respond, pulsating in sync with the energy of the crowd, their voices rising. But just as the light broke through the edge of their unity, a piercing pain gripped his chest. Suddenly, a shadow lunged toward him, a dark hand aiming for his heart. Would this be the moment he failed? Would his song be silenced? The air hummed, charged with a tension that threatened to snap. The decision loomed heavy. Would they fight to keep their hopes or yield to the darkness? The haunting question lingered, what price would they pay to push back the void? The shadow surged forward with terrifying speed, a dark specter eager to snuff out the last flicker of light. The musician could feel its icy breath at his back, chilling him to the core. Panic clawed at his throat as he fought to remain focused, his fingers still dancing over the keys despite the imminent threat. Don't let fear take you, he shouted, forcing his voice to resonate. Each note he played became a barrier against the encroaching darkness. Around him, the crowd responded, voices blending into a choir of defiance, fueled by adrenaline and newfound courage. Yet, the shadows swirled with malicious intent, leaving whispers that curled around them like vines, tightening with each minute. A tall man, near the front line of the crowd, clutched his chest. A look of despair washed over his face, and he gasped, it's too much. This isn't worth it. Stop, the musician cried, his voice rising above the chaos. You can't give in. Remember what's at stake. With those words, small pockets of defenders emerged. The young girl, her back straight and eyes fierce, yelled back, we want to let you win. Others rallied behind her, emboldened by the resolve they found in each other. But not everyone was on board. Voices shouted skepticism, doubt and fear crept into some murmurs. What do we even have to fight with? Someone questioned, looking around despairingly. As if summoned by their hesitation, the shadows recoiled with a low growl, pulsating with dark energy. They curled and twisted, shifting shape, morphing into grotesque figures of despair that prowled, hungry for the slightest flicker of hope to extinguish. Mortal sacrifices, precious little sacrifices, they taunted, their voices combining into a sinister tapestry of dread. "You'll give up something. You always do." The musician felt a fresh wave of panic washed over him, and he wondered if they were truly prepared for what lay ahead. Every heart around him thumped wildly in sync with his frantic resolve, a shared frequency sparked by fear but pulsed with something far stronger: hope. "Stand strong. Fight for your truth," he urged, his heart racing. Suddenly, a light burst through the crowd. A woman with a lantern stepped forward, her face resolute even as shadows danced behind her. "We stand as one. I choose to give my fear up to this." A ripple of energy surged through those surrounding her, and one by one, others took up their own sources of light, a shimmering phone, a flickering candle, all kinds of precious beacons of warmth. It was a small act, but it spread rapidly. The musician felt an electric shift. Their flickering lights illuminated the depths of their unity, breaking the shadows' hold and forcing them back. The power of their combined strength made the darkness tremble, but the lingering threats were still there, whispering seductively. Just then, the oppressive heaviness lifted for a heartbeat, giving the musician breath. "Play, my friend. Let this music be our battle cry," cried the tall man from before, his determination etched into his expression. Taking a deep breath, the musician played with even more fervor, the keys becoming an extension of his defiance. Every note wove together their shared fears and hopes, creating a complex tapestry that resonated deep with the crowd, their humanity mingling within each chord. But just as victory felt tangible, a colossal shadow twisted unbidden through their light, striking the very center of their formation. It split their growing warmth, forcing them apart. The young girl was knocked to the ground, her lantern shattered, casting darkness across her anguished face. "Get up!" the musician screamed, despair biting at him. How could they recover from this new assault? In that moment, the cacophony of shadows intensified, echoing the threat in voices that clawed at their sanity. As the musician's heart sank, one terrifying thought loomed: had they gone too far? Would the sacrifice demanded beyond this point be their very souls? As the darkness began its choked grasp over them again, the musician faced the horrible uncertainty: what more would it take to illuminate even a sliver of the path to escape this nightmare? In that moment of dread, a quiet resolve began to swell in the crowd. The very fabric of fear that had threatened to tear them apart started to unite them in the face of despair. The young girl, crumpled and scared on the ground, raised her head, her expression igniting a flicker of hope within those around her. "I won't give up," she shouted, forcing herself to her feet. "We are stronger together." The musician felt that courage ripple through his fingertips, and he slammed his hands back onto the keys with renewed vigor. The notes flowed, warping and twisting into the music of defiance. The shadows recoiled, hesitating under the assault of sound, and the crowd responded with an eruption of voices, a rising tide of unity, a chant of "Together." "Together," echoed in sync with his frantic melody. The heaviness of despair started to lift. Fingers of light emerged from the assembled crowd as they reached deeper within themselves, producing phone screens and small candles, illuminating the night in a collective act of bravery. Each flicker of flame, each glimmer of light, pushed back the oppressive blackness, inching closer. "Don't stop!" the musician roared, emotion flooding through him. He got lost in the rhythm, each note igniting fervor like gasoline on flames. The shadows writhed, their dark shapes squirming against the vibrant light. With every chord struck, the shadows shrieked, their outlines blurring as if they were losing form. "You think your light can vanquish us?" The darkness howled, its voice turning desperate, but the crowd surged forward, buoyed by the sheer force of their unity. The palpable tension morphed into determination. They stood shoulder to shoulder, hands grasped, hope forging an impenetrable shield. "We can fight it," one person cried, and the energy surged. "We won't be overcome. Your fears are a weapon, but together they become our strength," the musician declared, his voice rising over the din. The skies above began to brighten, just as dawn casts its first rays onto a weary world. The colors of hope splattered across the dark canvas of night, piercing the gloom that had threatened to consume them entirely. And then it happened a shift. The shadows retreated, snapping back like rubber bands, their claws released from the hearts of the people. As if thrown backward by an unseen force, they began to dissolve into the very fabric of the alley, their menacing forms turning into wisps of sorrow, seeming to lose their grip on this world. As the last notes rang out into the air, a hush enveloped them. The alleyway stood illuminated and clean, filled with the trembling laughter of disbelief. They had faced their fears, had pushed back against the darkness that had threatened to devour them. The musician's chest tightened with mixed emotions: relief, joy, and a haunting sense of warning. What if they return? He wondered aloud, casting a glance back toward the edge of the alley where signs of darkness still lingered. They will, the young girl spoke, her voice steady as she wiped dust from her clothes. But now we know we can stand together. Their eyes met, igniting a new fire in the crowd. They had shown resilience, born out of the necessity to protect one another. Now they understood the sacred connection of unity they held. They were vulnerable but strong, both weighted with fears yet capable of transforming them into courage. "Let us promise," the musician called out, drawing everyone's attention. "We'll always play for each other. If the darkness comes again, we'll face it together. I promise." The crowd echoed, their voices intertwining in a chorus stronger than any melody he could create. It felt like a pact forged in fire, bound by soul. With one final harmonious crescendo, the musician played a triumphant finale, the last notes ringing clear beneath the morning sky. The clouds broke apart, welcoming the golden beams of sunlight which cascaded over them, illuminating faces full of hope and resolve. As he stepped away from the piano, feeling the enigma of night dissolve into dawn, he knew this was a beginning, not an end. They would move forward, carrying the weight of what they had confronted but also the luminous spirit that had come from within. The crowd began to disperse, their hearts a little lighter, their conviction stronger. They had learned to harness their fears, not as burdens, but as the foundation of their unity. The musician gave a small smile, knowing the shadows would always loom, but with this newfound strength, they would be ready to play their song against any darkness that dared to return. And so, as the sun rose high, casting a warm glow across the alley, the musician turned to the empty streets, ready to embrace the world once more. But there was one last thing he held a secret, with the promise of a new journey ahead. With one hand over his heart, he whispered a silent vow: "Music will always bring us together. Now, before you leave, there is something important. You need to subscribe now so you don't miss out on the next exclusive stories just like this one. Smash that like button to feed the algorithm and show your support. This is the moment to stand strong together, and don't forget to flood the comment section with your reactions and theories about what just happened. Share this video with at least 5 friends who need this uplifting conclusion. Don't wait even one more second. Your support truly matters.